O'Reilly. You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Hunting Collective. I'm Ben O'Brien, and in this episode, I'm joined by a man that I've wanted to have on this podcast since I picked up a microphone to start the thing, and that man is Jim Posewitz. And Jim Posewitz is, to me and to many others, a conservation legend. And if you don't know who he is, shame on you, you bastards. Listen up. He is a legend in Montana. He had a 32-year career at the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and in doing so helped create the Ecological Services Division and helped protect his adopted home state of Montana, the Rocky Mountain Front, the Yellowstone River, and some groundbreaking tactics to protect these places from development of all shapes and sizes. He has a lifelong passion for writing, and as you'll hear in this podcast, penned a book called Beyond Fair Chase that was a national bestseller, sold over 700,000 copies, and just wrote his autobiography called My Best Shot. And he's a man that is living the conservation ethic. And some of the stories he tells in this podcast, some of the ways he shapes the foundational elements of hunting and our pursuits are seminal to what we do. And it's very special to me to be able to sit in his home and listen to him speak about these issues. I loved it. And to help out with this conversation, I brought along Sam Lundgren. He's a Meat Eater. He's part of the Meat Eater editorial crew here in Bozeman and is a devotee and follower of Mr. Posewitz, and has talked to him many times before, and I believed would help out with the conversation. So, without further ado, please enjoy Jim Posewitz. Jim, how are you, sir?
I am fine, Sam. How about yourself?
I'm doing quite well.
We're all doing well.
Good.
We're all doing well. Well, thanks for having us in your home. This is
you bet, Ben.
It's good to be in Helena. It's good to meet you.
Well, my pleasure.
Yes.
I always like to see the young guard coming to the front.
We're trying to do our best generationally. I always like to begin some of these things with a description of where we are, since people can't see where we are.
Okay.
So I imagine from sitting in this room that there are, and already from chatting prior to hitting record, that there are a lot of artifacts of your life in this room.
Correct.
Many of them, including a giant mule deer in the corner. So give us a quick description of the room we're sitting in and where we are. So people
the room we're sitting in was built around 1909, and I happened to come across it later in life with a meeting of a organization called the Forever Wild Endowment.
Yes.
And the Forever Wild Endowment was having meetings in this room and this building. This is an add-on to the building, original building. But at the time, it was owned by Donna Metcalf, Lee Metcalf's widow.
Yeah.
And so I told her if she ever wanted to sell it, I could use the downtown Helena office space. And so that's how I came to own the building, was I bought it from the widow of Lee Metcalf. And he is, of course, one of the inaugural inductees in the Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame.
As you are also a member.
I'm also a member, and that's a growing cadre of cool dudes.
I'm going to write that down. That's the quote of the podcast early on. There's a lot of things in here. You were talking earlier, of course, about your giant mule deer that you killed. So give us a quick rundown on this giant. I'm going to take a picture of it so everybody can see how big this thing is. But what year did you kill it, and where did you stumble across it?
Well, I meticulously hunted it. In 1955, I was 20 years old at the time. It was my third year in Montana, third hunting season in Montana. And may have been just after January in 56 of an extended season, the extension of the 55 hunting season. But it was on a tributary to the Madison River called Wolf Creek. And what it was, in fact, in my book, Beyond Fair Chase, I have a little section on the 2 bucks of Wolf Creek, pointing out that I was a novice hunter. I had excellent hunting conditions on this particular day. Real cold, late season, lots of snow. We struggled just to get to the base of the hill. And, of course, up on the hillside at first light, we saw a number of deer. And that deer was in the group. And I had to get above them to hunt them. Mm-hmm. And in the process of getting to the ridge line above these deer so I could approach them from the top down and have better cover and that kind of thing, I sorted my way through 20-some bighorn sheep that were also up on that slope, and trying to do it without alarming them. And was able to successfully do that. I eventually get above these deer and begin the stalk and shoot that buck. And he was about halfway up a wide open slope, and there was quite a slide when he went down. And that slide was visible from the road between Ennis and West Yellowstone.
I know that road.
And the game warden saw that slide. And and his name was Todd. He was a very vigilant game warden, a good guy. So he goes and waits for us to come out, and it's cold, and I drag the deer down to the Jeep, and we take the Jeep out, and of course, en route, we almost ran into the game warden coming in. And he was convinced that I had poached a sheep, because he knew the sheep were there. He saw the slide coming off the hillside, and I had everything tagged and punched correctly. And so with some reluctance, he finally gave in to the fact that, okay, I guess these kids... These are
real deals. These kids are 20 years old.
Yeah. And that's kind of the story and this footnote to that one. The next season, I shot one in the same drainage, almost as big. And those are the 2 biggest deer I've shot in 60-some years of hunting.
Yeah, this is a giant buck to look at it now. The mass it holds on its main beams, really all its tines, is unbelievable.
And I take great pride in the fact that I never measured it, because I do not want to reduce that value of that experience to a mathematical number. To me, it didn't make any sense. It's a tribute to the longevity that was available because of the wild country that was in what is now the Lee Metcalf wilderness, And we're sitting in a building that was once the Metcalf guest house.
Yeah. I imagine your life has all kind of through lines like that with very.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that happens. I can give you another satellite story, and I guess you can.
We're here for them. Keep them coming.
Okay. When I was writing the book, on the 1912 election of Theodore Roosevelt, and I was working with an illustrator who ran a framing shop. And and there's quite a bit of Theodore Roosevelt, both in rifle in hand, plus the taking a bullet. Both books focused on Theodore Roosevelt. And I write about Theodore Roosevelt shooting his first buffalo in 1883 on Little Cannonball Creek in far eastern Montana, tributary to the Little Missouri. The guy at the framing shop says, there's a guy who comes in here from time to time, and he has me frame memorabilia from the original Bull Moose Party in 1912. And I said, oh, what's his name? And he said, well, it's Doug Ferris. Well, Theodore Roosevelt's hunting guide for the 1883 hunt was Joe Ferris. And I come home and I tell my wife, Gail, I've got to find Doug Ferris. And she said, well, let me make some calls. And that kind of surprised me, but I said, fine, I'll give you some help. We call around, we find Doug Ferris living in a rest home about 2 or 3 blocks from our state capital. We go and have a meeting with him, and it turns out to be Joe Ferris's grandson.
Wow.
Gail wanted to make the phone call because he had been her next-door neighbor for 10 years and never made it. The story never, was exchanged. And so she had lived next to the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt's original hunting guide.
And there she was, married to a man writing books on the phone.
Yeah,
wow.
Right. And we find him 3 blocks from the state capitol in the rest home. And one of the other things Theodore Roosevelt did locally was he put the Elkhorn Mountains into the forest system. And when in 2005, it was the 100th anniversary of Theodore Roosevelt, who put the Forest Service together, basically, in 1905 and during his presidency there. And so we had a little celebration over here in the Myrnaloy, which you can see out this window. And we brought the Forest Service and my organization at the time, which was Orion the Hunters Institute. We put together an evening program on the accomplishments of Theodore Roosevelt creating the national forest system and how we're surrounded by national forests here. And we invited Doug Ferris to come. And so he's on a walker by this time, and he's getting quite aged. But with Gail's help, we get him into the meeting room, put him in the front row, stand him up with the help of his walker, and I tell the story of Theodore Roosevelt and his hunting guide, Joe, and then introduce the grandson of Joe Ferris, Doug Ferris. And then he gets a standing ovation.
That must have been a powerful moment.
It was a moment, It's a golden moment.
Like I said, from in your life, the great life that you've led, there's so many things that you've achieved and done, but some of these stories are just the connection that the community that we're in
It's the richest
creates.
part of it, is the satellite stories. The main event is pretty interesting too, but when you have these intersections and trail crossings and things like that,
yeah. Oh, and the shared experiences, the shared passion that you have with these people that you just,
and total strangers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a part of the beauty of the North American model of wildlife relationship. We call it, the fact that in a democracy, any person that wants to can participate in anything, and including the hunt. And that wasn't assured. I mean, you look at our founding documents, and fish and wildlife is not mentioned. It's all about human rights, human liberties, and opportunity and all that. But none of the founding documents address who's going to own and be responsible for the fish and wildlife and who gets to be the hunter. That has to be decided by the courts. The court system starts arguing about that in 1842 over New Jersey oyster fishing in the New Jersey Meadowlands. And they say, because of the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Supreme Court says this, because of the Declaration of Independence, the people are the sovereign. And those rights and privileges of sovereignty belong to the people.
Yes.
And the fish and wildlife resources to be managed as a public trust for their benefit. Huge decision. That decision was made 16 years before Theodore Roosevelt was born. 16 years after Theodore Roosevelt dies, I was born. That's the whole show.
There we are.
Of people in a democracy finding a way to live with, appreciate, enjoy, and take care of these products of nature.
Yeah. Are you proud of hunters? Are you proud of, as you sit here today, are you proud of what hunters have done?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the record of achievement, I mean, we haven't always been, this dance was not done in ballerina slippers.
There was some clogs involved.
There was clogs and hobnails
That's right.
and other things. But you look at the end product, something you can actually go out and measure, something that is real. And you look at a wildlife resource that was marvelously restored. When Theodore Roosevelt shoots this buffalo in 1883 on Little Cannonball Creek, Montana,
Yeah.
he was so excited to get one of the last. North Dakota had their last commercial slaughter in August of 83. TR showed up in September, hunted for 9 days before he and Joe find this lone wandering bull.
Never in sight of a live one, never out of sight of a dead one.
You
Jinx.
got my story right.
You owe me a Coke, Ben.
Yeah.
In a journey of 1,000 miles across Montana, from the eastern border to within sight of the Rocky Mountain front and back.
Yeah.
Wow.
We were the boneyard of a continent.
And does that define in that period of time? Because the definition of what a hunter is has changed many times over millions of years, of course, as our human existence has changed and shifted. Do you feel like the modern hunter was defined in that perilous time? Through we have the people we know that defined it, but do you really feel like it was codified in those moments?
Well, it was codified that it was up to the people. I mean, this was a public resource to be managed as a public trust. And like so many other things in a democracy, government often stumbles and fails and doesn't persist or whatever reason. And then the people in a democracy fill the gaps. I mean, I've spent 25 years working with the Cinnabar Foundation, and that is an environmental granting group. And our first year, we passed out 3 grants. This year, in modern times, there are over 140 or 50 applicants a year just in Montana looking for grants to advance a conservation or environmental restoration agenda. So that's the proliferation of the NGOs. And if you look back at the history of the idea of wildlife restoration, introduction of the sporting code and conservation, well, you're back in 1887. That's like 4 years after TR shoots that first wandering lone last bull. He forms the Boone and Crockett Club along with Pinchot and George Bird Grinnell and others for the restoration of big game and for the introduction of the sporting code.
Yes.
Now, I mean, I think Roosevelt at that time was maybe in his still late 20s. He lives to be 61. But he lives in a time when it was the dramatic destruction of America's wildlife was most dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, there were nothing but bones out there on the prairie.
It's like it seemed like in that time, for this continent at least, you have a group of people come over to escape an aristocracy. And in the European aristocracy, hunting was very different, right? Thought of as very different. It was a very elitist activity.
Right.
And that, the hunting ethic, what you might call a hunting ethic in that scenario, as folks journeyed to the New World, we lost, I would say, and I hope you would agree, that we lost for a time what hunters really were to society as we landed here and Manifest Destiny took over and folks started pushing west.
And, the first step is survival. You got to eat.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely.
In that same time period, in England, poaching was the number one rural crime. Mm-hmm. Punishment was often death. And one English code said it was if a person was convicted of taking so much as a hair, they shall have their eyes gouged out. Oof. In that same period, in merry old England, the aurochs, the boar, the beaver, the wolf, and the reindeer went extinct. They were poached to extinction at the same time period that the colonies were being formed. And of course, when the king was granting colonial lands to his buddies, they often included the fishings, hawkings, huntings, and fowlings. And so they were trying to take that European model and dump it. That gets changed by the oysterman. 16 years later, Theodore Roosevelt is born, and we are stripping the continent of all the game because of their commercial value.
Yeah.
Market hunting and other theories about our relationship with the native peoples here are probably likewise as valid. But there was no conservation ethic evident except in various individuals at the local level. I mean, James and Granville Stewart ride in here. 1857, that was 1 year before TR was born. They become territorial legislators in 1864. And as territorial legislators in 64, they put through a bill restricting fishing to a hook and line. And I thought, wow, that was good because Montana is being settled by miners and all miners have dynamite things. The truth of the matter was that was before dynamite was invented. They were doing other means of getting the fish out with seines and changing, just turning the stream course away and drying up the channel and picking up the fish. And so our territorial legislators in 1864 went and restricted angling to taking a fish to a hook and line. That was 12 years before Custer died at the Little Bighorn. In 1872, they began trying to set closed seasons to start protecting the vanishing remnants of wildlife here. So the conservation ethic is in the people. And in a democracy, it's a form of government in which that expression can live and get nurtured and get spread and adopted. And
well, where do you believe that, looking back at Teddy Roosevelt, where do you believe, do you think there's a seminal moment or a point in his life where the seed was planted in him, the conservation ethic?
Yeah, there's two writings you need to look at, and I can't quote them from memory here. But in 1883, he shoots that first buffalo, and he does this war dance around the fallen bull. He gives his guide, Joe Ferris, $100. In 1883, that's a small fortune.
You buy a house with that much money in 1883.
Oh, for sure.
A ranch.
He shoots a second buffalo in 1889, somewhere on the southern border with Montana, Idaho, probably not too far from Yellowstone. And his observations then are totally different. He talks about this soon-to-be vanished, this remnant of a vanishing race, and of course that was 89. But by 87, he had formed the Boone and Crockett, helped form the Boone and Crockett Club for introducing the sporting code and the restoration of big game.
Yeah.
And so his conservation epiphany occurred in Montana, I think.
Yeah, because there was no fatalism in his writings then. It wasn't like we're doomed forever.
No. And the fact that all these guys went back to New York State and gathered for Christmas dinner or something of that nature and decided to take action. And then in 1987, we dedicated the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch up west of DePuy as recognition of the 100th anniversary of Roosevelt's conservation epiphany and all the marvelous things he did. He set aside 120 million acres for conservation purposes when he was in the White House.
Yeah, do you believe, obviously said that feeling is in the people, right? The value for the animals is instilled in us.
So is hunting.
Yeah, these are things that are instilled in us. They may have been erased for a time as we battled with natives and as we, treated our manifest destiny as it was a value.
Well, I think, in those days, the fact that you have this conservation ethic sort of latent in the human culture and a lack of direction or leadership from the top end, you almost see the repetition of that in current events.
As you think about this, I don't want to fast forward in time too much. But as you're talking about this, I'm like, that's kind of still happening.
Well, sure, they're still trying to get rid of public lands.
Yeah.
Or get oil well drilled in them and coal mined under them, and when Roosevelt was putting this public estate aside, he was adding national forests and things, and Congress passed a law. They made it was an attachment to an ag appropriations bill. Again, that kind of shenanigans.
That seems similar to today.
Identical. But to prohibit him from setting aside any national forests in Washington, Oregon, Montana, Colorado, and Wyoming, and one other state. There were 6 states, anyhow, in this western bloc. And that forbid him from setting aside any more national forests. Because it was a rider on ag appropriations bill, they had the votes to override a veto. He has 7 days to sign or veto the legislation. In those 7 days, he creates 22 national forests, adds 16 million acres to the forest estate,
the midnight forest.
The executive orders doing that, and then signing the bill from forbidding him from ever doing it again.
And then after that, he started using national monuments to accomplish similar things.
Game refuges and bison refuge and things. And he wrote in his autobiography, "My opponents did handsprings in their wrath, and dire were their threats, which only attest to the efficiency of our action."
Still appropriate
to the moment.
Well, and you fast forward to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the first ever national was it North American Wildlife Conference?
North American Wildlife Conference.
1936.
I was 1 year old.
Yes.
I didn't go.
Oh. I was saying, I was there. I'll tell you what happened. So that's another, because it's enough to have the ethic, right? It's enough to say that we believe that these things should be taken care of. But it's another thing to develop how we would pay for that, how we would care for those things. So take folks through what happens at that gathering and kind of what it becomes?
Well, the gathering produced the National Wildlife Federation, a citizen NGO, because the government needed help.
Yeah.
And one of the first things they did was to work on producing and introducing the Pittman-Robertson Act, which would tax firearms and ammunition. And the beauty of that moment was the gun manufacturers were lined up with the sportsmen in pursuit of the conservation ethic that would restore big game across the entire continent. That went from introduction to the president's signature in 90 days flat.
Yeah.
And it was
it seems to me like
made a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like if something like that were to happen today, if 2,000 conservationists were to come together and decide on the future of this model.
Well, we tried that, in a period there in the late 80s and early 90s, we had a thing called the Governor's Symposium on the North American Hunting Heritage. There were 7 of them held. First one was in Montana, called by Governor Stan Stevens. Mm-hmm. And the idea was to examine what was wrong with hunting, because we were taking a horrible whipping, the hunting community was, because we were shooting every buffalo that set foot out of Yellowstone National Park. And I had been at a national conference in Washington, D.C., a meeting of some kind, and I listened to public radio, and they were bashing hunting mercilessly because of that action.
Yeah.
And that action was required by the Montana State Legislature at the time. And I came back, we had a new governor and a new director of the Fish and Game, and at one of his first staff meetings, I got up and I said, is there anybody in this room that thinks we're doing the right thing? And not a soul stood up, and that was the entire leadership of the Fish and Game Department. And the new director took note of that, and the new governor called the Governor's Symposium series, and then a legislator from Missoula, Bob Ream, introduced a bill to get that off the books, and he was successful.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a turning point for the buffalo, for sure.
Well, I mean, going back to, because I want to take your entrance into the fray here in the hunting space and the conservation space. You move on from I feel like the North American model, not named that yet until the 80s,
right,
started to really be concreted in after that conference and after we knew how we were going to pay for the Pittman-Robertson Act and knew how we were going to pay for things. I think things really, you could either say accelerated or normalized, and the modern hunter kind of sprung from there.
What didn't happen was that we approached various components of the outdoor industry as these conferences were rotating. Mm-hmm. Nobody was willing to step up like the firearms and ammunition guys did in 37.
Yeah. And they still aren't. This is very much still part of the conversation. People act like the backpack tax is this brand new idea, but...
Yeah, it's just retreading a great idea.
An idea that works.
Well, yeah, we went from the boneyard of a continent here. You can see deer tracks in the street outside downtown Helena capital.
And you would agree that there are more people now than there were in the turn of the century?
But we have deer in our cities, bears in our orchards, and goose poop on every golf shoe in Montana.
God bless for that.
Yeah.
Take goose poop all day.
I don't golf, but that's what they tell me.
Well, exactly, and that that the tax that was imposed during the passing of that act was an existing excise tax, right, of 11% that was applied, and it's still 11% today.
Right, and the states have to match it.
Yeah,
and the states cannot divert their hunting license dollar into other. Funding other parts of state government.
Yeah, well, they have 2 years to spend those dollars on what they're appropriated for. They lose them.
Not many are lost.
Yeah. And it's, only to look and see how efficient this is and how useful it is for our society and for our wildlife to see how long it's lasted.
Yeah.
And so how long it's lasted and
to go out on the landscape and walk the Sun River Game Range is a classic example of the Pittman-Robertson Act, standing there ready. And this was before the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Mm-hmm. And an absolute critical moment. In fact, that's a great story from a variety of reasons, because as the elk started to recover in the wild lands to the west of the Rocky Mountain front, they started getting out on private ground. There was a landowner named Rathbone who advertised in a New York paper for machine gunners to come out and shoot the elk.
What year was this?
This was probably in the 40s. Okay. And the source of this is a little book written by a guy named Tom Misselt, who was a Great Falls area sportsman and bookshop owner. And the Fish and Game formed a Sun River Conservation Council to address this conflict on the front. The landowner, Rathbone, he shoots one cow elk. The game wardens bust him, so the thing goes into the court. Montana Supreme Court says, when you buy land in Montana now, you buy it with full knowledge of the presence of wildlife for which there is no recourse. And that says, okay, boys, live with it.
You may own this land, but you don't own the critters on it.
That's right. That was a critical stage. But then to get relief, the Sun River Conservation Council forms. Tom Misselt was its chair. Another rancher from Shoto was on it named Carl Malone. They decided they got to buy winter range outside the wilderness areas where the elk have to come in heavy snow. And this one landowner puts up his place for sale, and his name slips my mind at the moment, but Fish and Game proceeds to try and buy it, but they hit a deadline where they have to make a $10,000 down payment by 5 o'clock on a particular day. And even then, nobody could move that fast in government to get 10 grand, because there was
10 grand is a lot of money in 1940s.
And a competitive buyer there. Tom Misselt and Carl Malone, the book owner and the rancher, put up 5 grand out of their own pockets to hold that till Fish and Game could go through and buy it.
Wow.
And that starts the progression of these jewels along the Rocky Mountain front, which now include Ear Mountain, Blackleaf, Pine Butte, Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch, and it's paradise.
It is paradise.
And it's windy.
It's quite windy.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Oh my gosh!
On the drive up here today,
I was going to get blown off the road.
Well, here you come now into the fray. When do you first remember? Now we talked about you shooting that big giant buck over there and when you were 20 years old. But when do you remember first having the urge to take action and join a game agency or join a conservation agency, and then how did it happen for you?
I want to go just a couple years back.
Yeah.
Before that, having interviewed Jim before, I want to hear how you came to Montana, then get into Bid's question.
I like
because it's a good story.
That's why I brought Sam. For other reasons, he's a handsome man, but
that doesn't help much on a podcast, man.
You have to take my word for it, people. Yes, you're coming to Montana, but let's hear that one.
Okay. First, a humorous anecdote. And when I was going to high school, they would use career testing kind of things, and there'd be counselors that tell you, what your aptitude tests, I think they called them. Mm-hmm. And I took my aptitude test, and one day the counselor called me in, and she said, I reviewed your aptitude here, but since there's no curriculum for hermits, why don't you go into fish and game? That's made up. But it was in high school, well, I was actually even before that when Mother would say, go outside and play. and I lived in a mid-sized community on the west shore of Lake Michigan. Yeah. And we could walk beyond the city limits to little woodlots that we just called them the woods. And that's where we would go play when Mother said, go outside and play. Yeah. And we had an interest in nature. We'd collect little things we'd find in the woods and put them in our rooms and stuff of that kind. And then I got into the Boy Scouts because they had a camp. And that was kind of a funny story there because my older brother, he went and he got homesick the first week he was gone. Camp was only a week long. I went 2 years later and I begged my parents to leave me there all summer. Which
a few early hints about what you wanted to do.
And then I, in time, became a counselor or junior counselor. And my dad ran a gas station and sold Christmas trees. And
yeah.
You take a break here?
Yeah, we take a break. Yeah.
Those diuretics drying me out.
So you were a counselor at a Boy Scout camp. So you decided that was the way to go.
My dad went to northern Wisconsin to get trees to sell on his Christmas tree lot. And one of those trips, one of his buddies bought a deer from an Indian, and I got a foot.
So bought a deer to eat from an Indian?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so at summer camp, I would take that deer foot and I would mark the woods because there were no deer living there. And then we'd have nature hikes and we'd show the scouts the deer print. And then one night a week...
Like, looks fresh.
Yeah. Well, one night a week, we'd have a night hike, and one of the counselors would take the old mounted deer head out of the mess hall, sit in the swamp with it. We'd follow the tracks down through the trail to the swamp and then shine that deer. And they all went home thinking they'd seen their first deer.
Took some imagination back then, huh?
Yeah, well, and that was early exposure, I guess, playfully. Then there were a couple of famous grouse biologists working in Wisconsin, Fred and Fran Hammerstrom, working on the prairie chickens.
Yeah.
One of the other counselors at the camp, who was a few years senior to me, he became a conservation aide at their study area. Mm-hmm. And so I would go over and sit in the blinds watching the prairie chickens dance. And I could see no other profession for myself. And then...
Was it just the... Can you describe what captivated you in that time? Like what motivated you?
Watching these grouse dance, and looking at, talking to the people who were doing... They were both PhDs and beyond, but they were studying the prairie chickens.
Yeah.
And we got to participate. We had the spotting scopes and binocs, and we would try to read the band numbers that were visible and things of that nature to try to make a contribution and try to help. I don't think probably at that time I had actually hunted and killed anything yet. But that certainly was an interest. And then when you live on the shore of Lake Michigan, you get kind of an aquatic bend, and you take an interest in maybe fish and wildlife.
Sure.
And one day after basketball practice, I was sitting in the bleachers watching some other level of our high school team play or practice. And the head basketball coach sat down next to me, asked me what I wanted to do for a career. And I said conservation, because at the time it was Wisconsin Conservation Department.
Yeah.
That was the Fish and Wildlife Management Agency. And he said, he said, maybe I have a contact for you. And, of course, the guy who was the Bobcat coach in the early 50s had been a coach at one of the Wisconsin Teachers College, and so he knew the whole teacher network of athletic coaches in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And so my high school basketball coach put me in contact with Tony Storty, who was the head Bobcat coach, and they were trying to become competitive because they hadn't beat the Grizzlies in Missoula since 1902.
Wow. So
that was
Wisconsin versus Montana.
That was when Theodore Roosevelt was president.
All the way back.
That led to recruitment to Montana, which has got a whole bunch of other stories that have nothing to do with hunting and fishing. But,
I imagine I'd like those too.
Making the team and everything. And then in 1956, that season, we beat the Grizzlies in Missoula for the first time since 1902. So they got their money's worth.
I'll say.
But they had gone, through the recruiting net to the industrial heartland, so to speak, where all the thugs were hanging out playing the game. But I grew up, an hour's drive from Packer Stadium. What else are you going to do?
Look at this. Yeah, we have a photo right here of you doing your best, football stance.
That was my freshman year at Bozeman.
And what year is that?
That was 53.
53. You're looking pretty good there. You look like you might have been running back?
No, I was a tight end and linebacker.
That's a good combo.
And I got my recruitment reputation because I made all-conference middle linebacker in the Fox River Valley Conference, which is Green Bay, Manitowoc, Fond du Lac.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a competitive high school environment.
So that's corn-fed football country right there.
Yeah, and those were 60-minute days. You played both ways.
Yeah. And then I imagine you were playing football in Montana and started looking around and you saw, these mountains. This is
well. I had an imagination. I mean, when I met with the coach and got to talking to Montana, I had to run to the encyclopedia to see where the heck it was. But there's all kinds of stories buried there.
We'll try to keep to the hunting ones if we can.
Yeah, right.
I'd like to
say
hear
it's
all
easy
the
to
best
go
ones.
off on tangents.
I like tangents. So you're in Montana. And can you, and you're still here right now, many years later. Can you tell us kind of how it sank in for you? Like, this is the place for me. This is the life I want to lead. I go outside and appreciate this.
Well,
nature.
When you read about it before coming out, you realize this is a mountain, Rocky Mountains, and all that happy stuff, and you have something in your imagination that's pretty vivid. And, of course, when you come to Montana, riding on the train, at that time we woke up somewhere just west of Glendive and started looking for the mountains. It took
Still got a ways to go.
Yeah, it took a long time, but eventually when you leave Billings, you can pick up the Beartooths, and before you get to Livingston, you can spot the Crazies,
yeah.
And then you go over Bozeman Pass, and then you're right in the middle of it, and have no idea, where to get started. But that's how you get there.
And you got there. Did you feel almost immediately drawn to those mountains, and did that start to define the rest of your life?
They were what I was looking for, and it wasn't a disappointment for certain. Yeah. And it was all imaginative, in the imagination of a 17, 18-year-old kid.
Yeah, 18-year-old football player.
Yeah, never been west of the Mississippi, never been east of the west shore of Lake Michigan. But I'd been to Green Bay, and my dad was an athlete. In fact, he played in the first season there was an NBA.
Really?
Yeah.
And what year was that? I have to keep asking what year is that. I'm trying to get my bearings.
I'll look it up for you before you leave here.
We will look it up. Is there? We haven't got to your first hunting experiences yet. Tell us about those. Tell us about how it hooked you.
Well, I had to wait 6 months. Well, I started trying to be an archery hunter in Wisconsin, but there were no deer in the county where I was living. But north of us, there was a place called Point Beach State Park that you could hunt in, and that's where I probably saw my first deer in the wild.
Yeah.
And I'm up there with a bow and arrow, and I have, not a prayer.
You're thinking, I hope this isn't a taxidermy deer. Somebody's playing a trick on me.
Pretty close. I mean, and I saw one deer, and I shot an arrow in its direction, and I knew it was out of range and beyond the range of the arrow, but I wanted to go home and tell my buddies I got a shot.
And that ends up, it all spins back into, I'm sure in that area of the world, I've not hunted it myself, but today in that area of the world, there are many, many deer.
Oh, yeah. All my brother's sons and shoot deer, and they never leave the county.
Yeah. And so that just shows you
the restoration of Pittman Robertson there. That was passed when I was 1 year old.
Yeah. And now, you shot at one deer, but now you go there, and it's a tradition. That's part of that landscape.
Yeah.
Whitetail deer hunting.
And then when I got to Montana, I had to wait 6 months. And so I got here.
Through that right now.
I got there in August of 53 for preseason camp. And then in January, I hit the 6-month mark, and they had an extended deer season in the Bridger Mountains. I borrowed a gun, drove out there, and no hunter education or anything. and shot a doe deer. Hung it up in the men's dorm, and left the windows open, and it was a vacant room. And all my buddies and I had a hot plate, and we just go cut off a chunk of meat and eat it.
Did you bring a dead deer in the dorm room, Jim?
Well, it was a vacant dorm in a dilapidated dormitory. It was called the Hudson House. It was a former military barracks converted to a college dorm, and the coach had promised us free rooms. So he puts 10 of us in a recreation room in this old dilapidated dorm. And, of course, 10 jocks living in a room got kind of rowdy.
Yeah, I have to imagine it.
A handful of them were GI Bill guys, so they'd been around a little bit, and that's where they were recruited from. And one night we had this super bash party, made horrible...
No, that's fine. You're here now.
Horrible amount of racket and things. And the very first thing in the morning, the Marines in our room, the ex-Marines that were part of our group, they get us all up. We scrubbed that place down till it shone, sparkled. And then it had one table in the middle of the room, and we sat there with our books open in front of us when the Dean of Men busts through the door.
You were all looking like, did you guys tie sweaters around your shoulders? So reading our books?
I'll never forget his expression. I mean, his jaw flat hit the floor.
Hello, sir. How are you today? And describe, I mean, like, can you remember... that first deer, like, you remember having some emotions around that, or thinking that this is an important action, or was it just in your youth?
Well, I borrowed the gun. It had a peep sight. I never even shot it. Went out on the hillside above a rancher's building that the rancher was a butcher and a booster.
Yeah.
And so I see this deer. It's close. I put the sight on it. I pull the trigger, and the deer's gone. And I walk up to where the deer was standing, and she's down, and I'd hit her right in the head. And then when one of my Marine Corps buddies saw it, he said, "Boy, that was a good shot, right in the head." And I said, "Well, that's all I could see at the time."
You wasn't your best John Wayne?
Yeah.
Help hard.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes you got to shoot him in the head.
Yeah, that was deer number one. And, of course, the landowner who gave us access there was actually the town butcher. And so he took care of, cut it up for us and everything. That was pretty fancy.
And then you're eating in the dorm room.
Yeah, well, that was a different deer.
Oh, okay. Moving forward, like you get out of college, you survived, you didn't have any too crazy stories for us. You didn't get kicked out or anything.
Well,
let you stay in.
Went into the 3rd Infantry Division for a couple of years, which was customary at the time. Got to go to Bamberg, Germany. And so in the fall of '58, the Bamberg Riders won the U.S. Army Europe football championship. So we had tradition going there. And I was living off base because I was on temporary duty to the football team. And so during the season, you lived any way you wanted to between practices. And it was called temporary duty. And I was freshly married and living in a little cold water apartment a block away from the military base, which was pretty cushy. And the punchline here is that's called temporary duty, TDY. And the coach's pep talk before every game was, "Do or die for TDY."
Because full duty ain't for us.
Yes. Yeah. But I also took time to join the local base rod and gun club and tried to get qualified to be a hunter in Germany and doing the studying and all that stuff, and became quite familiar with the European methodology or a component of that. And it's a very respectful relationship between the hunter and the animal, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
had I been qualified, then I'd have to wait for an invitation to go hunt by the Jägermeister, or the huntmaster. And they had arrangements where that could be accomplished, but I wasn't there long enough to actually have a hunt in Germany.
And you're to study the flora and the fauna, and those types of things.
And one of the part of their rituals was called the last bissen, and that is when you shoot an animal, you take whatever is been feeding him and give
last meal.
Cut a branch and just put it in his mouth as the last bite. So, I mean, there is a lot of respect, and it's a kind of an honorable thing to become the hunter.
Yes.
And in fact, we were sitting in a cafe one night, my wife and I, and somebody comes into the door, busting into the door. There'd been a crash or accident out on the roadway. And he said, "Is there a hunter in the room?" Because they learn first aid and patching stuff. And I never quite forgot that, because that's what this citizen was looking for, somebody that had training.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it on this podcast before, the way the European tradition was held, and the way it is. The modern European tradition has kind of been twisted a bit, but I'm sure in those years, the hunter was still the center point sometimes of the community.
Mm-hmm.
We had a fellow on that grew up in Czechoslovakia, and it talked about the idea of a hunter. The term they used for hunter also meant thinker, like one who thinks, someone who is able to look at a group of animals and pick out the one that is best taken in that scenario. And so the respect for the animal was put at the feet of the hunter.
Yeah, it was included, at least in their training and what they expected of the hunter.
Yeah. And the hunter, had to be exalted, because they had to make these very serious decisions about which animals to take, which to leave, and how to manage, the entire ecosystem, really, and what they were doing.
True.
So you spent 2 years there, you told us, right?
Yep.
And then you come back to Montana?
Right.
And coming back to Montana, what's next for you?
Well, graduate school, and I did a fishery study out of Bozeman. Got a master's degree in April of '61. Then I went up to Great Falls as a fish biologist. And after a year and a half of that, they moved me to Glasgow as a fish manager. And after 4 or 5 years up there, they moved me into Helena as the head of the Water Resource Development Section. And then in 1969, Anaconda wanted to open an open pit mine at the head of the Blackfoot River.
That's right.
So that became one of my projects to build a baseline study of the fish and wildlife up there. And the land board was confronted by a room full of Missoula College students the day they had to make the decision on whether or not to give the state lease to the Anaconda Company for a dam on Alice Creek to supply water for this mine, Heddleston mine. And the students packed the place, totally out of the blue, kind of, although it couldn't have been. But as far as we knew, where did they come from? And the land board hung up 2-2, so they couldn't issue the easement. And the governor, Forrest Anderson, turned to the director of the Fish and Game, and I'll leave the profanity out, but he said, "You caused this problem, now you solve it." The director came back, gave me the project, and said, "We're going to turn water resource development into ecological services division." And so that's where we started. And then we charged Anaconda Company for half the baseline study. We told them, "Look, we got to have some help, some financial help to put some people in the field to get this data." And that sort of started it, where we started the pattern of making the applicant pay for whatever it was that we needed to do in the field. And while all this is going on, Salvador Allende seizes Anaconda's holdings in Chile, and the company collapses.
Not foreseen. Yeah.
So in my book I write, so when the salmon fly rises to, or when the trout takes your salmon fly off the surface of the Big Blackfoot River, thanks Salvador. Because we'd have had a Berkeley pit could have had a Berkeley pit at the head of the Blackfoot River.
Yeah. As you speak about these things, it's amazing to me how similar it is today. The debates that are happening today, the battles that are happening today, and how the two sides are very similar to even today. I mean, even going back into the time of Teddy Roosevelt and railroad tycoons and timber barons fighting against
Copper
formation
kings.
of these national forests.
Well, that's the ultimate beauty of the democracy of the wild, because anybody can step up and take a shot at it.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened. At one point they were New York City patricians, that they had a philosophy that because they were rich, that those to whom much is given, much is expected. And they actually lived by that code of their own. Yeah. And that's why these philanthropic actions of guys like Roosevelt, he didn't need to work.
Yeah.
Gifford Pinchot didn't need a job. But they took on the mantle of leadership and reformation. And
well, to your point, I think if they hadn't, someone else would have.
Hopefully,
we got it seems like it's just innate in this continent and the people that landed here and formed this country specifically.
Mm-hmm.
It was innate in them to value the resource, and so I believe in any listening to you talk. I believe that I'm glad that those the forefathers of conservation did what they did, and Teddy Roosevelt had the balls of a moose. He did. He did a lot.
That's mostly Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah, I mean, your entire bookcase is.
When I saw the 100th anniversary of his presidency coming, I told my sons, I said, anything by or about TR for Christmas. I had to go buy the bookcase, but that's
full. That's full.
That's one Christmas's supply. And it's amazing because you get into it, and then you talk about the trail crossings and intersections, and the fact that
it's amazing.
Theodore Roosevelt and Granville Stewart were both members of the Montana Stock Growers, and they met at the Stock Growers meeting in Miles City. And at that meeting, one of the authors that wrote about it said that Roosevelt backed Stewart on every issue that was raised on the overstocking of the range.
Yes.
And then Stewart, from that stock growers meeting, was going north in pursuit of some horse thieves that were hiding out in the Missouri breaks. Roosevelt tried to sign up himself and the Marquis de Morris to join the posse. And Stewart said, no way. You guys are way too high profile.
You're too important for this.
Yeah,
job.
we're not riding. You're not riding with us on this particular adventure.
Man with balls.
Yeah.
With balls.
Well, then they were going to go saddle up and go hang some guy in the breaks.
He went to D.C. and did some hanging.
Well, then I read another book about James Willard Schultz going down the Missouri River on the 100th anniversary of Lewis and Clark. And Schultz describes his trip down the Missouri. There's no dam or Fort Peck or anything. But in one part of his book, he tells the story about visiting with some ranchers down in the breaks. And they tell the story about Stewart coming down and hanging the wrong guy. I haven't researched that connection yet. But
that's awesome. Well, you spent 40 years at Fish and Wildlife.
32.
32. Well, okay, we'll round up. I rounded up for you.
Yeah.
Before you retired,
I flunked out of retirement.
And then, as we were talking about before, I think to fast forward to what I think everyone really needs to hear from you, and what I really want, I think a lot of hunters want to explore, is hunting ethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after your tenure with Montana, you went about penning a book called Beyond Fair Chase.
Right.
And we double checked before starting the podcast. It was published in 1994, correct?
Correct.
Take us through why ethics for you, why after all this time spent in the hunting community, the conservation community, why ethics was important to you, why fair chase was something that was a pillar in your life, and why you felt the need to address it at that point.
Okay. I'm leaving fishing game in the 80s, late 80s. I'm wrapping things up kind of. That's when I had gone back to Washington, D.C. That's when we were killing every buffalo that set foot outside of Yellowstone National Park. And that's when hunting was being vilified, coast to coast.
Yeah, and this is kind of like the pinnacle of the hunting participation at some level in the mid-'80s, when it was really...
And I guess I was aware of the conservation side of what the hunters were sponsoring, and that story was not being told by anybody. And so I came back and we started the Governor's Symposium series on the North American hunting heritage under Stan Stevens' first term as governor. And we started talking about, what's wrong with us and what's right about us as hunters. And we held 7 national conferences in the process. And of course, that when you got to start inviting speakers and become a speaker and stuff, you have to start doing some studying.
Did you remember, it strikes me though, did you remember when you say that you want to, what's right with us and what's wrong with us? That's a pretty heavy statement for me. Do you remember back in time to why that you wanted to explore those things, particularly what's wrong with us?
Well, what's wrong with us was, I guess the consummate thing was how we were treating the buffalo coming out of Yellowstone Park. Everyone setting foot in Montana was to be shot. And that was so alien to the conservation ethic that had restored abundance of wildlife clear across the state of Montana that I stumbled into, in the middle of a deer recovery boom of the 1950s. Yeah. I was no great hunter. I mean, deer were everywhere. And to start adding, things up, and just why a person is even inclined to go out in pursuit of whether it was a or a cottontail rabbit or a pheasant or a ruffed grouse. I mean, that was my total bag as a hunter before coming to Montana, was a couple of cottontail rabbits in an apple orchard because the orchard guy didn't like them nipping out the bases of his trees.
They were probably pretty good tasting rabbits.
Exactly. Although my mother was quite puzzled what to do with it.
Did you find yourself to be unique in that in the thoughts you were having around the examining the why or the ethics?
No, and here I tend to maybe make some stuff up because the competition for the hunter's attention had turned to, did you get your limit? How big was your buck? And it still persists. I'm glad I never measured any of my animals.
Yes.
Just won't do it. I mean, because it's just degrading. And then you realize, whoa, there's more here to that. And I had a consummate experience, after all the stuff, it's 25 years with the Cinnabar Foundation funding conservation, environmental protection, wildlife restoration. and then 15 years with Orion. And what that adds to the personal experience becomes overwhelming.
Yeah.
And a couple of seasons ago, I'm stumbling up into, we used to live 8 miles south of town, and just out the back door did lots and lots of hunting. But I go to an old familiar place in the dark, and I sit there because Gail's coming up the other side.
Your wife.
Yeah, and she's liable to, start some elk out. So I'm sitting in one of the passes where they sometimes go.
As the hunter is known to do.
So I'm sitting there in the pre-dawn, and I'm looking down the trail I came in. What looks like a father and 2 sons come walking up the trail. And I'm just sitting there. Excuse me. The father sees me, and he halts the boys. And they're like poster children out of Hunter Education magazine. I mean, they're control of their weapons, undivided attention, standing there quietly in the background. And the father tiptoes up to this old guy sitting in the woods. And the father says, "We don't want to get ahead of you." He whispers it to me. And I look, and I'm thinking, here I'm sitting on the national forest, public lands, in pursuit of a restored wildlife population that's available to anybody. And the first 3 guys I meet want to defer to me.
Yeah.
And I said to and I'm thinking of Theodore Roosevelt talking about the generations within the womb of time is what he called this. Well, there were 3 generations right there. This old guy, me, the father, and 2 sons, what I took to be 2 sons.
Yeah.
And I look at the situation and I say back to the father, I think I know what I see here, and I want you ahead of me. And then he says, the youngest boy can shoot a cow if he sees one. And I give him a smile and a thumbs up, and the kid's face lights up in the dark with excitement of that moment. And in his anticipation, his excitement, and just, again, I lean on Roosevelt. We do these things for the economic well-being of the people, but there is more. They also add to the beauty of living and therefore the joy of life. And there I was looking at the joy of life shining in the dark.
Yeah.
And I thought, holy mackerel.
Well, and all you've experienced in your life.
Yeah, and then they walked up, and then they walked ahead. I sat there and I bawled. I was so emotionally moved by how this all fits.
Yeah.
And when you see, and these people didn't know any of this stuff, I don't think, but maybe they did, but probably not. But the 2 boys I know got my book.
Well, I think that your emotion there is built in what you've seen and what in some ways you've shepherded in your life.
Experienced, and to say that buck is a big accomplishment, it's not true.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a big part of, and I think one thing that you've done in your career and that I hope to do, and I'm sure Sam hopes as well, is to carry that torch. It is to understand the history of what came before us and how miraculous the time that we've described in this podcast was for America, and how miraculous that it has lasted for these decades and throughout your life is even more miraculous. That it's amazing to have thought about, you were 1 year old when the early conservationists were coming together to decide the future, and here we are in the future, and there was 2 boys there that learned something that they to them was likely innate to their family and to the way of life, which wasn't always that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't the royal hunting party.
It was not.
These were the real Americans.
And it's democratic in its nature. And I think this spins well into, I think ethics and hunting.
Oh, I forgot to answer your question.
We'll get there.
Okay.
We got plenty of time. Have a drink. We'll all have a drink.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there because they're great and they're super friendly and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
In elevating the conversation of ethics, as you did, there was, and in your book, there's the level of caring about, to me, what struck me was the level of caring about the community of people that you were involved in, but the level of caring about right and wrong for them and that discussion, and as you wrote that book, what's your ultimate goal? Like, would you remember what's in your head is, I'm going to achieve something from this writing, or is it just the conversation that you had within it?
Well, there's other things going on in a person's life, and in the context of this subject, I had been going to the SHOT Show.
So many parallels here. We're getting ready to go to the SHOT Show,
right? And here is the commercial extreme, and they're just peddling their stuff, and nothing matters other than to sell the commodity. And the fact that there is an animal involved going to get shot out here does not ever cross that border. And that's the tragedy of the industry, not seeing a more powerful reality than just the antler or the quantity or the locker full of dead fish or whatever it is. But all they're doing is promoting the commerce of it. And, of course, the commerce is what drove it to its knees to begin with.
Sure.
The buffalo hide and other, just the meat markets. And here we're going right back with this huge engine.
Yeah, boy, isn't that a powerful notion? Like,
yeah,
would we allow that to reverse?
Right. And so where beyond fair chase to try to find another path came from, the publisher of Falcon Press at the time tossed a little copy of a book called The Ethics of, or the Style of Writing by Strunk and White, Elements of Style, or I forget the exact title of it now, but it was a little tiny paperback book about writing. And he said, I want you to write a book just like this on the ethics of hunting. And I said, okay. I never written anything. Well, I've written articles, but never a book. So I sat down and I just wrote Beyond Fair Chase. One of the things I did right was it wasn't a list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots, because they're everywhere and they're nowhere.
Yeah, that is true. It's the tricky thing about ethics.
Yeah, and so I spun 5 stories into the book on relationships between the hunter and the hunted, including that buck there, and
I remember,
and another set in my downstairs from the next year in the same hillside, basically. But at any rate, I drafted it, and there was very little editorial stuff. Oh, and he wanted it called The Little Brown Book on Hunting. Because Chairman Mao had just come out with the Little Red Book.
Little Brown Book on Hunting. That would have lasted as long, but Beyond Fair Chase is a little more universal.
Snappier.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, what I did was I offered to buy a beer for about 4 or 5 members of the Rod and Gun Club that I was a member of. Told them the dilemma that I needed a better title. And at the price of a couple of beers, I got one of the guys, Mike Trevor, said, how about Beyond Fair Chase? And that rang the bell. And so that's where the title came from.
Yeah.
And then I wrote the book, and it has 5 stories. One about the wounded bull, which is one that comes back to me most often. One personal story about when my son passes up an elk because he wants his father to confirm that everything is good.
As we all do.
Yeah, and then in the next season he gets an elk there, and I thought, wow, it all fits.
Yeah.
But at any rate, there's a ton of stories about stories coming back to me.
Yeah.
But that will take a
long
while.
time.
But at any rate, that's where Beyond Fair Chase came from. And then the breakthrough there was I had been meeting with the International Association of Hunter Educators. Mm-hmm. They were having an annual convention in Des Moines, Iowa. And so I wrote the guy and I said, look, I've got this book and I'd like to tell about it at your convention. I'll take any place on your program that you might be able to fit it in. If somebody cancels or whatever. And he agrees. I said, okay, come on. And he gives me the award banquet speaking spot.
At this point, you probably studied up, yeah.
And my wife, Gail, goes. She's on contract here with Falcon Press at the time to promote the book, sell it. And one of the guys from his staff down there at Falcon Press goes along. We go to Des Moines. I write a speech. And we get into the banquet room, and Gail and Chris, the other guy from Falcon, they set up a table to take orders on the outside of the banquet room. This is the Hotel Fort Des Moines. And I get in here, and here's all these oak walls and beautifully kept historic place. And it occurs to me, because I knew a little bit about conservation history, that Aldo Leopold, Iowan, and Ding Darling, Iowan, Ding was the first president of the National Wildlife Federation, spoke in that same room. So I threw away my text and I talked about the echoes of their words that are held in these walls.
Yeah.
And when that was over, they swamped our pre-order table, and Gail and Chris pre-sold 100,000 copies of Beyond Fair Chase.
Wow.
Oh. And what did you tell us before? 700? How many thousands?
It's about 700 now.
Unbelievable. 700,000 copies.
Yeah.
And Sam, what like when you first read it, what did you think? What was your reaction to what you'd read? What Jim had put together?
Well, I think it started getting distributed to hunter education courses probably right after I went through that. So I didn't read it until just a couple years ago when Lantani gave me a copy.
Yeah.
But was that the one you started with, the story of like killing a sparrow?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. I mean, I definitely resonated with it immediately, having grown up, with a BB gun in hand, killing all manner.
Yeah, I'd forgotten it till you mentioned it now, but yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that was... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
Bill Schneider wanted to call it The Little Brown Book on Hunting. I wanted to call it The Sparrow and the Mammoth Hunter.
That's a pretty good title. That's pretty good.
I feel like a T-shirt.
Yeah, it turned out to be Beyond Fair Chase.
We like it. But yeah, this book becomes a seminal project, and I read it, I think, about 5 years ago. I remember when I first started to... I had been a professional in the industry for years, and when I first started to examine my own actions, and I remember it was around a photo I took of an elk. One of the first elk I ever killed was in the Madison Valley, and we took this photo. The hunt lasted an hour, and the photo shoot lasted 3 hours, with this different positions of this elk, and I remember no one taking a photo of us cutting it up, or no one taking a photo of me packing the antlers out, no one taking a photo of me doing anything other than standing around with this dead elk. It's the first elk I've killed. Mm-hmm. And I just remember at some point in that hunt just thinking, I'm not sure what's going on here. Like, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. Because at that point I was an editor for a hunting magazine, and companies would invite me out, as you spoke about. It hits home to me. You spoke about like how we've turned hunting into a commodity. We use it to sell things, which changes a lot of the motivation for some hunters in the industry. And I think that was part of what I was struggling with there. It's like, why am I really doing this? Yeah, I'm eating it. Yeah, there's conservation, but what am I doing?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was struggling to get at, Ben. And something I think the ultimate revelation it provided me was it's sometimes not enough just to follow the letter of the law. Just doing what is legal does not completely satisfy our responsibility to this resource. And growing up, I, for the most part, followed the law. There are definitely some waverings there, but I feel like by the time I'd read it, I'd come to agree that game laws were there for a good reason, and that I didn't like to give cops a reason to mess with me. But it really cemented, I think, ideas that I'd already gathered from other works and things that. And I think this is the great beauty of that title, is you need to go beyond what's required of you as a hunter, and make sure that your actions are defensible and beneficial to the resource, and that you do as much for that animal and those populations and those resources.
Yeah.
As much or more than they do for you, and that you have that responsibility, that it's a give and a take.
Yeah. Do you think about your effort to, and then just your own personal feelings on defining the relationship between the hunter and the hunted, like how we feel about animals? How much time have you put into that in your own personal huntings?
Well, it grows with time. I mean, the first thing that I wanted to do with that borrowed gun was to find a dead deer after I sent around that direction.
Me too, yeah.
Yeah, and then, of course, it became take care of it. That was kind of an autopilot. That's why I was there. But the more experiences you have, and the more you learn about where you're hunting and the history of the place. You know, the Rocky Mountain Front, of course, is a classic. But that first ranger up there, Ehlers Koch, he spent 30 days in 1905, Forest Service's first year, and 30 days in 1906. And he described what's the Bob Marshall Great Bear Complex now, but he described them by drainage. And in 30 days of hunting each year, he said, I never saw or got a shot at a single game animal except one mountain goat. I mean, you get trampled back there in 60 days now.
Yeah, you would.
But that was the depth to which this slaughter had gone. And he rides in, and he was a conservation-oriented guy, and the front has got a very rich history of people popping up along the way. Sometimes they're in the agency. They made it a wilderness before there was a Wilderness Act. And Sun River Game Preserve was created, and I think it was only one dissenting vote in the Montana State Legislature when that was passed through, start protecting this stuff. And that was from the grassroots rancher from Shoto.
Yeah.
Or maybe he was a businessman, I think, from Shoto, but that we had to do better.
Yeah, had to do better. And you feel like we've done better?
Well, yeah, certainly we've done better. And, of course, now the problem is, again, as wildlife became more abundant and people are more interested in hunting and commerce returns. And then when you've got the critter living private and public, both, you have those conflicts. And those will be issues that your generation is going to have to come to a management scheme that is good for the critter.
Yeah,
that was a question I've had sitting on my list for a while. That, well, I mean, you're moving us in that direction anyway. The fair chase ethic arose around Leopold and Roosevelt and all of those, and by and large, we have recovered a lot of our wildlife in this country. I was just curious to know, from you, how do you approach some of these modern issues of fair chase and hunting ethics? Where do you start when people are talking about, I don't know, like I feel like bear baiting is very much in the modern debate. Some people would say that by putting out bait, you're creating an unnatural situation to chase an animal that may not be fair. Other people would respond that by hunting bears over bait, you have the opportunity to properly sex the bear, make sure you're taking a boar, preferably a mature boar, and you'll have an opportunity to take a good, clean, standing shot. And this is something I struggle with. And I'm just curious, like, having being the guy who wrote the book on fair chase, what's square one? Where do you start when trying to parse these difficult discussions?
Well, you kind of start at midpoint on the spectrum, and at that midpoint is where you accept responsibility both for the taking of that animal that is equal to your responsibility to see to it that that animal was even there. In other words, if you've got to realize that you're just not a freeloader. And I think there's kind of a middle point in a hunter's career where when I borrowed that gun and shot that doe, I didn't even know why she was out there,
Right,
or why the land was public. And as that awareness grows, and you don't have to have that all for your first start out of the chute, but when you decide you're going to be a hunter, I think it would really be, I know it's to your advantage to start viewing it in the full context of why this could even happen. And that enriches it.
certainly does.
My best hunt was when I ran into those 3 guys south of town.
Sure.
I didn't even fire a shot or tag anything, or I didn't have to drag anything out. But I had an experience that added to the beauty of living and the joy of life, as Roosevelt called it.
Yeah.
I mean, what more could you get out of an activity?
Yeah. Well, isn't that? I mean, that is ethics, right? I mean, it's just like the evolution of your experiences and to form the way you interact
Right.
with.
And I think if you have the commitment, we're all going to stumble, every now and then something will go awry out there, and you don't have to beat yourself up on it. Just put it in balance of a journey that you're on. And when you get to be in my demographic, all I got to do is look out the window and spot that deer track in the alley down here. I mean, there's a trophy.
Yeah,
Sure.
And it's because our society has said, we do not treat these things casually. They are a fellow passenger on this planet, and they're telling us a lot about what we need to know if we're going to make this as rich for future generations as it was for ours.
yeah,
That there's still generations within the womb of time with an expectation that we're going to leave them not only a livable planet, but a relationship with the other life on here that we haven't had traditionally. And in some of these writings that I've been made available to me by my sons for various Christmases, there's one called A Forest Journey. And it points out that the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where civilization's birthplace,
Fertile Crescent.
was once a forest so dense the sunlight could not shine through. And that's the sand piles we're out there blowing each other up on right now.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And we had a second chance here. We had a new world. And we made a bunch of mistakes. We didn't say please when we put foot on an eastern shore.
No.
Yes, we did not. No.
We didn't say thank you yet, but nonetheless, I think there's way more to getting the full measure of the experience than just the day afield with the rifle in your hand. It's learning all you can learn about the places where you're going and their history, how they got to your custody. And there's beautiful stories littered through that. And then when you have an appreciation, of the hand of Roosevelt is on you. He put these forests around us.
He sure did.
You're not going to be
Against
casual,
all odds,
right?
Yeah, against all odds for sure.
I know, and all the other people that pop up at various points and various levels in our society all had to make a contribution, for that moment you get in the woods. And when you know as much of that as you can possibly stuff into your brain, then I think you're getting the full joy out of life.
Yeah. Would you, as I hear you tell that, do you think it would be necessary or fruitful for you, as you are now, to travel back to that 20-year-old young hunter who shot the doe in the head and explain these things to him, or do you feel as though the learning was necessary? I think the way that it came to you was necessary.
Well, I don't think you can stuff that into somebody.
Yeah.
You know, I think you show them pieces of the puzzle and tell them there is such a thing, and motivate people any way you can to pique their interest.
Yeah.
And have the materials available for them. You know, have the access. I shouldn't have had to wait till I was turning 75 or whatever the heck it was to start really, really studying Theodore Roosevelt. I thought he took San Juan Hill. That was enough for me.
Rough Riders. He was in the Rough Riders. I saw that movie. Yeah. No, I think it's all very interesting to me because through this conversation and listening to you talk, there's so many threads. There's so many through lines to how I feel, you know, and I'm sure how Sam feels and how a lot of people that are coming of age and hunting right now feel. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the, for lack of a better term, I don't really like this term, but a lot of the adult onset hunters now feel, because I think there's many, many folks who are picking up hunting at this point in time when they're in their 30s or 40s. They never had a father or mother to teach them that, and they're picking up hunting as an adult. And the reason I asked that last question is because I often wonder if it's necessary to go hunting as a child or as a young man or woman without all the burdensome knowledge of the past, to be able to just enjoy and interact and simplify. And to have done that is to have done it in a pure way. And then as you grow your experiences, you'll grow your knowledge and grow your intellect and grow your ethics and your fair chase ideals. And I always wonder, you know, as an adult onset hunter, somebody that's 35 right now listening to this that just picked up hunting, whether you feel they're at an advantage, an intellectual advantage, being able to assess the history and the gravity of hunting, or at a disadvantage because they weren't able to come at it with a childlike enthusiasm that, you know, we'd all like to have.
Well, I think both avenues are 4 lanes.
They're both highways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's one thing to come on it with. Well, when you study the biography of some of the heroes, they came here because they were living in a concrete urban environment and reading about adventures of the frontier. Yeah. They wanted to have one. And that cost a buffalo of Little Cannonball Creek. It's, it's life.
Yeah.
But then the compensation that came as a result, we're back with wolves, we're back with lions, we're back with buffalo, we're struggling with buffalo. But just think of the reality of that struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a Native American taking a handful of calves off the Rocky Mountain front and hiding them out at Pablo. That made a huge difference. The species that might have gone, and it's in the Buffalo book I'm reading now of Steve.
Steve's, yeah.
And beautifully documented.
Yeah, that's one of Steve Rinella's best works.
Yeah, and the summer of 2018, I call it the summer of our dance. It's in our Christmas letter. And what it amounted to was we got acquainted with a little Native American girl named Millie, 7 years old, adopted by friends of ours. And we heard that Millie was going to, it was right in this room. I was sitting here. I had Jesus Christ Superstar on my on my tape player. And little Millie came up and she was dancing to the music. And I thought, gosh, that little girl, it fit. That she had something in her that was a talent.
Yeah.
And then we learned that she was at the Polson powwow this year, so Gail and I went up, and Millie's mom and grandma had decked her out in finest dancing gear, and we joined in what they call the circle dance, where you get to be part of the outer ring, and inside the circle dance was little Millie and 400 Indian dancers.
Wow.
I think Gail.
Did Gail get that?
Yeah.
She got it.
But at any rate, and we were in this outer circle dancing around them, and in the background was the Mission Mountains, snow-capped and gorgeous. Several weeks later, we're on the Rocky Mountain front, on the other side, the Rockies. And it was at a gal's birthday party. And the attendees were almost all ranch families and stuff. And the old gals, most of them with more than a little gray hair, got into a line dance. And they were stomping out this Western tune on the Rocky Mountain front. And in the background was the Sawtooth Ridge and Ear Mountain, and just a glorious front. And so the Native Americans were on the west side, the ranchers were on the east side, and they're all dancing with the Rocky Mountains in the background.
Yeah.
And two of the guitar-playing singers in the Western band on the front were members of the Blackfeet tribe. Things come full circle.
Yeah. Without knowing it, they're dancing.
Without knowing it.
They're dancing under the same
Gail
shadow.
and I were, participating in both. We were in the outer circle of Millie's mother's invitation, circling the 400 interior dancers, including little Millie. And I first spotted her talent sitting in that chair.
Jesus Christ Superstar.
Jesus Christ Superstar.
That's a hell of a disc player.
I mean, just think of the wealth of experience in a lifetime that you can harvest here.
Yeah.
And hunting is like that. You harvest an experience. You maybe hang stuff on the wall to remind you of the day, not whether your animal was bigger than somebody else's animal. It's the glory of the day and the experience you had. And
is that the message that you would want to desire to give to folks? I wouldn't say young hunters, but new hunters, people that are trying to examine their own pursuits and understand what their motivations really are.
Sure, and I think the more you learn about the conservation ethic buried in this democracy of the wild that we've got in this country, most places on Earth, the Fertile Crescent didn't go from a forest so dense the sunlight couldn't shine through to a sand pile by accident.
Yeah.
Because here we had, and subsequently, that was, I think 7,000 years ago.
Yes.
But nonetheless, that's what happened to the land, because there was no relationship between the people and the things that were out there. And granted, when the Marines landed there, Saddam had his private antelope hunting ground. And the Marines that were camped near Saddam Hussein's private fenced-in hunting ground started supplementing their meals with wild game. And they imposed a bag limit on themselves.
Wow.
That's the strength and the depth of that conservation ethic in North America.
Yeah, like I said, there's this. It seems as though that's a great example of like this innate value system that we have, and it's born in us for some reason.
And we purge it out with this commercial hype that we pour onto it. Just first of all to turn them into something monetary, and then go through this big restoration process, and now the capitalizers, I guess, are again stalking the commons.
Very much they
They
are.
never stop.
Very much they are. And again, as we go through this conversation, the history of what we do and what we love, the sides of the coin seem to be the same as you flip it. You know, it seems to be there's takers and there's caretakers, at some level.
Absolutely. And that's probably not going to change, and as long as we keep pushing our DNA forward.
I hope that we do.
Well, Jim, I like what you're saying about fair chase as almost a state of mind or a journey through life. But there's a difficulty in that if that's, what we're trying to abide by, because there will always be takers. And the way it seems that you're portraying this, it seems difficult to impose personal decisions onto others. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, how do you tell someone don't do that?
How can one say that's not fair chase to another hunter?
Well, right, and it's different at different stages in the individual's evolution as a hunter.
Right.
There's probably a time when a young hunter still thinks the only purpose in being out there is to take. And the sooner we move that threshold of understanding forward, and I think, today materials are available that you can sort of infect the young hunter with an idea or a thought or a sense of value. And I think it helps people who are sitting on the border saying, I'm not sure I want to be a hunter. I mean, I sure like wildlife. Is it okay? And those are the kind of people you're looking for, and to have material available for them. And Beyond Fair Chase was just step one. Okay, you want to be a hunter? Think about it this way. And I think the net effect of that will show up in society as we progress here. And the other thing is to tell them, appreciate the real beauty of what you got out there. Not only don't you have to take anything, but you can have a great day and let one walk on by if you want, because you just, I guess, make choices that try to enrich your lifetime experience for yourself, realizing that or accepting the fact that some of this may take time. You may have to have a handful of experiences. You may have to find time to go to a book cabinet and read the autobiography of Theodore Roosevelt.
It's a thick one.
Yeah. Or, so many people have written about him.
Yeah.
But there's a marvelous consistency that comes out of the more of it you read. You find very few contradictions. And in fact, after I read his autobiography, I read his wife's, Edith Roosevelt's autobiography to see
just to see if there's competing information.
Yeah.
Sure, if you read my wife's autobiography, it'd be like a lot of like that jackass. That could be probably the title.
Yeah.
No, it is interesting, when to introduce those things and how, I think we as modern hunters, you in your hunting life, have not had to struggle with a thing called social media. We're, I feel like, infantile in our communication on this platform, and hunters, I think, have been struck with a conundrum that is unique to this time and this generation. We now, I believe, I'm 33, I believe that my generation of folks, millennials, I'm in that generation, sad to say, that millennials can no longer walk into a room in most places. Maybe Montana is a little bit different, but in most places in the world, in this country, say I'm a hunter without having to then explain why. like how it benefits society.
defend it.
Or how can you?
Yeah, how can you? You can't be like, hey, I'm a hunter, and the next someone will ask you why, and I think the why is just how does this benefit society? And so now we have a bunch of people struggling to communicate on this mass platform that everyone has access to what we're actually doing. Mm-hmm. And it gets sensationalized, it gets misrepresented, it gets boiled down to one little photo. There's so many touch points for hunting that weren't there, during your formative years.
Yeah.
There's people can reach into the hunting community and grab what
didn't
they
even have
want.
hunter education then.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the NRA had hunter shooting safety programs, I think.
Yeah.
But they weren't required, and I never took a hunter ed course.
Yeah. And so your communication around hunting was, even you were saying in some of your later work is like we were trying to get the magazine out. We were trying to get these printed materials out. And now the information at our fingertips, I think, puts the modern hunter in this really.
Well, it certainly accesses a hunter to a body of knowledge that I never stumbled across until I'm like in my 70s, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you sit on the point of a pyramid.
Double-edged sword, yeah.
Well, I don't know how to make my hands work here, but you're sitting there with a photo of a dead deer, and you're kind of the top stone on a pyramid. And the more you know about the base, what all went into that being possible, the more appreciative you will be. And I think the probability when you appreciate all that it took to get that to your custody,
yeah.
The more you appreciate that, the more likely you are to contribute, look for a way to contribute and to learn more and to have a higher degree of satisfaction.
Yeah. Do you feel like just almost by osmosis that appreciation would transfer to somebody who's never done it before? Like would be so relevant, so readily seen in the imagery or the communication that
Well, I think they would cause them to hunger for the experience.
Yeah.
Laid out as an option in front of them.
Yeah.
In a democracy where anybody who wants to can give it can take a shot.
Literally.
Yeah.
Literally. That's well put. Hunger for the experience. I think I learned of all the things we've talked about, that's a learning that I'll take away because I really do feel I probably make it more complicated for myself than I should, but I feel like this.
No, it'll just come like a flash. I mean, when those three guys stopped on the trail,
Yeah.
To date, that's the best trophy I've ever bagged.
Yeah. That's amazing.
And I made a huge mistake of not finding out who they were.
Well, if they're listening to this,
yeah,
the older man on the trail would like to say thank you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, how many activities do you engage in that you can get so emotionally moved that you sit out and cry your eyes out?
Yeah.
Because it's just so powerful. And you think, holy mackerel, thank you, Jesus, for putting me here, giving me this generation or letting whoever, puts this all together for you.
Well, we thank you. I thank you. I'm sure, Sam, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Absolutely.
And for your works in hunting. And
you guys are tough.
a lot of questions, man.
Oh, man.
And I just feel thankful that we were able to spend this time, and thanks for having us here, and
any old time.
Thanks for being a steward for generations to come.
What else could you do? You've got all that stuff in your head.
Yeah, there's a lot to get out. Well, thank you again, and can't wait to another conversation.
Yeah, always great talking with you, Jim.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
I'm looking forward to Alzheimer's when I forget all this stuff.
The world less complicated.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's it. That is all. Another episode of the Hunting Collective in the books. So privileged to have the chance to sit down with Jim Posewitz, to learn about his life, to let you all in on what he's done with his life, the story of his journey through the hunting world and the conservation world and the developing the ethic he has around both of those things. I'm very hopeful that this informs you and inspires you to do good work in our world. It certainly has for me and Sam as well. So on to the next thing. What are we doing right now in Meat Eater? I always try to let you know what we're up to, where we're going, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to grow. And at this point in time, we really want you to go over to the Meat Eater store and check out what's there and see if you can't find a t-shirt or a hat or maybe a hoodie. You never know what you'll find there. There's all kinds of cool stuff. With the Hunting Collective logo, with the Meat Eater logo, there's an awesome shirt for my boy Ryan Callahan. Smell us now, lady. You'll see that there. So get it done. Get over there. Also, I will be appearing at many of the live podcast events during the Meat Eater Live podcast tour. That's going to be fun. We're going to be in a lot of towns. We'll hope to see you there. There's VIP tickets, some available. Most are sold out, but there are some VIP tickets available. And we want you to show up and hang with us at these events. And if you've never been to one, it's basically a bunch of us sitting on a stage doing a podcast, talking about what we love. So I'll be appearing. If you want the dates, you can go to themeateater.com/events/live podcast, and you'll find the dates there. But if you just want me to tell you right now, I will. It's Reno on February 7th, live at the Sheep Show. There's some tickets available for that. Get over there, sign those up. The doors open at 1:30 p.m. I'll be in Sacramento on February 9th at 8 p.m. at the Crest Theater with the crew. And I'll also be adding one more, as I'll be at the Boise show live at the BHA Rendezvous, and that's on May 3rd. Tickets are not on sale right now, but they are coming soon, and there'll be other shows added, and I'm likely to be attending those as well. Regardless of where I am, you should try to get to where the Meat Eater Podcast Live Tour is, because we'd love to see you there, man. And it is a real tangible event where you can come and hang with us and hear from us, and we can hear from you. I think everybody on this team would say they really appreciate anyone who comes out to spend time, money, and energy on what we believe is the right thing to talk about. So with that, we hope to see you in those towns. I will be talking to you next week on the Hunting Collective podcast with another great guest. Hopefully you will enjoy. See ya.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.
As you know, the Meat Eater Live Tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.